When's the last time you were interviewed?
I think one of the last conferences someone did a little interview with me, but not frequently, that's for sure.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Matt Landau. I'm the founder of VRMB and The Inner Circle, the most independent group of vacation rental professionals online. And this is Unlocked, the Tiny Architects edition, in which we travel to meet some of my contemporaries in their element and find out what makes them so special. This is Unlocked.
I don't even know what we do. You've just got me all confused and bamboozled, and you are sitting here rubbing your hands together like an evil villain.
Yes. To everyone who's listening in, this is Matt Landau being interviewed. This will be awesome.
And to everybody who's listening, this is Sean Miller, the president of Point Central, sponsor of this podcast, who, when we decided to do a season 4, said, "This sounds great, but I'd like to interview you." And true to form, here we are. You're interviewing me.
Yeah. Luckily, I just felt like it'd be a fun thing, Matt. You're doing so much to help everyone else understand what's going on in this industry and how to make sense of it. Probably to make sense for people to take a moment and understand the man who's helping to pull this together. So, on that theme, first question for you. The theme of season 4 is Tiny Architects. Do you mind explaining what was your inspiration behind that theme?
Yes, Tiny Architects. Charles Darwin, you may know him, was studying the ocean off the coast of Sumatra. And he observed that the coral reef possessed more diversity than anywhere else on the planet. And he observed that diversity was also creating the most innovation. And when I heard that, and he described those living organisms as a myriad of tiny architects, I loved the saying. I envisioned all these little people building little things, and I applied it to our vacation rental industry and realized that what we have here is a movement of tiny architects, people building their own little empires, whatever that may look like. And so for that reason, this season we're on the road. We're going to independent owner and managers' homes, finding them in their element, documenting what makes them so great. And I thought it would be a cool theme to call the season The Tiny Architects, to come up with a really cool little graphic, which is the front album cover that we've got for this season, and to do Charles Darwin some justice,
Awesome. Well, as someone who likes to scuba, I find that analogy very interesting because each tiny architect knows their little fiefdom, but when you step back to look at it and it makes the entire reef, it's the reef that actually moves things together, but it has its each intricacies that are beautiful and unique about it. So I look forward to hearing what comes out of this
fiefdom. I love that word. That's going to officially belong somewhere in the subtitle of the season.
Awesome. All right, so as true to your interviews go, Matt, can you describe for the listeners where we are right now?
Yes. We are sitting very specifically in a room with a couple empty tables. We are with Stuart and Tammy, the producers of the podcast. There's a nice big painting on the wall and a projector. This is actually the speaker's room for VRMA International. The event is taking place this week in my hometown of New Orleans. It was about 5 minutes for me to get here. I went home for lunch yesterday, and the event is the biggest that they've ever had, more than 2,000 people. So for me, getting to see all of my buddies in one place, not to mention my home, is like the best.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since we are in your home, when this comes out, this may be a little late, but in case people didn't get a chance to fully experience all that New Orleans has to offer, what is your favorite food, place to grab a drink, and thing to do here in the Crescent City?
I gotta say, after moving here, if there's one thing that I have learned, it's that no matter what time of the day, no matter what day of the week, if you feel like venturing out into public and being entertained, whether it's music or food or art or just people watching, it is always on. So there are tons of different places that I have been frequenting. One of my favorites is a po' boy restaurant called Killer Po' Boys. All my local friends in New Orleans are like, "Oh, that's so touristy," but I'm telling you, the sandwiches are as good as any po' boy I've ever had in my life. A sandwich there for lunch is always a good stop. I've got my swimming pool right around the corner. I love going swimming in this big old historic building that's the oldest, I think, gym in the country. I love wandering to the various parks that they have here. Audubon Park is amazing. There's also all these squares. Jackson Square is a good one to just sit and hang out. And probably my favorite drink is a new place called the Elysian Bar. It's in an old church. And you wander back, you feel like you're kind of stepping back in time. And you have like drinks that you drink with your pinky out.
Interesting.
And they're really small too. That's when you know it's going to be a fancy drink, when it's tiny. And you drink like all of it in one little gulp. So Elysian Bar, hat tip to the Elysian Bar. That's like a little mini afternoon for me here in New Orleans.
Okay, well, since we're doing this conversation over lunch, I may try and wander to Killer Po' Boys after this.
It is excellent. I highly recommend the beef debris po' boy. It's basically like shredded beef on a really nice crispy bun with pickled green beans.
Wow, okay. All right, I can't talk too much more about that or else
Okay.
people may hear my stomach start to rumble through the microphone here. Okay, so Matt, you talked about, we're at Verma, there's 2,000 people here, which is the largest ever. Let's step back, right? So young Matt Landau, however many years ago that was, what did young Matt Landau want to be? What was your dream as a kid in school? When I grow up, I want to be X. What was that?
I did not have an answer to that question. There were kids in my class who wanted to be scientists and mathematicians and, professional sports athletes. I did not have an idea, to be honest with you, and I still kind of don't. In college, I was asked to choose a major. That freaked me out. That made me stress because that forces you to choose something, and maybe I'm just not good at choosing. But I never really had an exact idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I loved travel. I knew I loved to collect things, and I knew I loved working with people. So I think that combination of factors is more or less beneath all of my professional journeys. So I certainly did not know what I wanted to do when I grew up, when I was younger, and I still don't really, but I do know that at the moment I am on a good path, and most importantly that I am on the path with good people. That for me is most important, and that if we don't have to exactly know where we're going so long as we've got the right people in the room, and that's who I'm looking at right now.
Right. And for those listening in, Matt's looking at Tammy and Stuart, his production team here, with gracious eyes. So he's passing around a visual thank you. Okay, Matt. So I guess if at one point you owned a vacation rental, between college and trying to figure out what your major was, any highlights along the way of things you did that you think were key to sort of making who you are today, or furthering that interest in travel and people and connecting the dots?
I traveled to Panama 2006, and I visited the historic district of Casco Viejo, which was, and still is, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Beautiful French and Spanish colonial architecture, but yet it was very dilapidated. It had gone through several decades of despair. It was primarily inhabited by squatters and gang members. And I fell in love with the neighborhood. And it was such a weird feeling. In hindsight, I don't think, I would best describe it as almost like you're falling in love with a person. It's like this strange connection that you have to this place. And I bought a business there, Los Cuatro Tulipanes, which was the first and only luxury accommodations in Casco. So if you came to Casco during 2005 to 2015, well, more like 2012, we were the only place to stay. And I bought that business without any real planning, with a couple partners, without any real education. And I learned the vacation rental business on the fly, the same way all of our friends who are managers do. There was no textbooks, there was no courses, there was no one telling you how to do it. We made every mistake in the book. We embarrassed ourselves plenty of times. There was thankfully no one to take our place. There was no other competition in town. And so I'd like to think that that made for a very nice learning environment. And by the time I started VRMB, I had accumulated all of this DIY knowledge of how to run a vacation rental business. And I had the travel sense, the kinds of places that I liked and what I liked to do when I went there. I liked to meet locals. I liked to do things that were not necessarily designed for the mass tourist. I like to eat delicious food. I like to be challenged in my thinking. I think all of those things go into what we do now, which is really what I consider to be almost like a dream job.
Awesome. So you're enjoying this. You've got this small community you sort of help turn around and we're enjoying what you're doing. You mentioned VRMB, which you could have had parallel path or dual paths, right? You could have kept managing your vacation rental business and had VRMB as a community of people to share thought. But at some point, either one day or over many days, you decided, I'm going to stop doing the vacation rental and I'm jumping full time into being an educator or share of information. What drove that? What was that catalyst and why?
I think this is a great topic, and it's something that doesn't get discussed all that much in our industry. And it's when you decide to leave your vacation rental management business. For me, it was almost 10 years of on-the-ground management, which I absolutely loved. I had an amazing team who did all of the really difficult things, and I was tasked with what I consider the really fun things: meeting guests, promoting and marketing the business, forming relationships with people in the community. But it also grinds you down over the years. And I like to think I know way more now than I did back then. And I made several managerial choices that were taxing. And I found myself being stressed and wanting to go out to dinner and yet having to take an emergency phone call from a guest. Wanting to go on vacation but needing to do a check-in because our manager was sick. The stress of all that, not to mention having lots of employees counting on me, was just a weight on my shoulders. And there came a point where I felt like the business deserved somebody who was as passionate as I was when I first started. And I think that grinding down wore away some of my passion, to the point that I was kind of viewing it as just something that worked on its own. And it didn't have the enthusiasm, it didn't have the excitement, the drive in its DNA like it originally did. And that was when I kind of decided that if you are not fully invested in your business, it's a good time to think about either selling it or giving it away. And in my case, I sold it. It was close to the giving away dynamic, but in the end, it was time for me to leave management, and I may come back to management one day, but I loved the idea of having a more or less one-man show, being able to work from my computer or wherever I happen to be, not having to sustain too many employees full-time, and I have very much enjoyed that transition since I sold the business almost 2 years ago, and I'm a newfound happy guy.
Good. Well, that self-reflection is important, right? I mean, the guests that we all work with and serve are taking vacations to recharge themselves and have times with their family. And if you find, I think that everyone in this industry has a passion for it, and if you find that passion being depleted, taking the self-reflection to understand either what you need to do to recharge that, or maybe what you need to do to change it, so that you can still do the things you enjoy, but everyone gets the right experience from it, is important, but maybe not always that common. So,
and if you don't do it, you run the risk of burning out.
Yeah, it becomes monotonous, right? And then in today's hyper-competitive world with reviews at the touch of an app, you set yourself up for problems, right? So identifying that and making sure you're always engaged and passionate is important. So thinking about your time, or thinking about VRMB, what's your favorite story that's come out of VRMB since you started it?
Oh my gosh. If you imagine how many great stories come out of every property management business and then multiply that by 850, not to mention just VRMB subscribers, like above 10,000, I have lots of really great stories. For me, the most poignant ones are the ones in which the vacation rental business sort of transcended business and somehow changed someone's life. So there's the story of the individuals who used vacation rentals to get out of debt. There's the story of vacation managers who took over the family home after their mother had passed to keep her legacy alive. The vacation rental business that plays an important role in its community. These are the kinds of stories that when I read them, and I receive lots of them, when I read them, I really it's remarkable. And I think that's what the power of this industry has, is its ability to change people's lives and communities. And I think that's a really exciting thing.
No, that's awesome. What about if you think of those, and is there one business lesson you've sort of gleaned out of those? So if you take the emotional, the connection part out of it, is there one lesson to share with the listeners that you've heard just people stumble over this, or it's a common misconception, or whatever it is, but hey, if you were starting your own management business, this would be something you want to do from day one?
Yes. And I actually got to do a shout out to Steve Milo, who I interviewed episode 1 of last season in Barcelona. I was there with you. And he taught me something that is going to sound so simple and silly almost and obvious, but I only then finally understood it, and it was that you must run your business at a profit. He said, if you're running your business at a profit, you are in so much more control. You are able to be so much more choosy about the kinds of companies that you work with, kinds of properties that you're managing, kinds of guests that you're accepting, and vice versa. If you're not operating your business at a profit, you become susceptible and vulnerable. And I am not someone who always puts money first. In fact, I'm notorious for forgetting about the money thing. But that's actually irresponsible from a business perspective, because if you're not putting profit first, you run the risk of failing. And so I take that and I basically implement it in what I do, and I encourage all the other owners and managers who are so supremely passionate. And they think to themselves, no, it's okay. I don't have to worry about profits nearly as much. I'm passionate. That's great until the money challenges you to continue to keep going. So I like to look at it as this necessary evil. You must be running your business at a profit in order to continue enjoying the passion. And if you don't, you're out of luck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think many of us make that common misconception that the head passion or the heart passion projects can't necessarily live in harmony with the head of numbers and profit. But I think Steve also had a comment that you're alluding to of if you're not running for a profit, you can't keep investing in that passion, right? And if you're truly passionate about something, you need the other half of you to look at the business and make sure it's operating, that you're a good steward of it, because that's how you'll continue to follow up on that passion. So that's a good piece of advice. I think that's definitely, when people get into this, I could see that. You mentioned a bunch of reasons why they get into this at first. It's very rarely because I want to be a vacation rental manager.
Right.
But the ones that are successful, regardless of size, the ones that have done it for a while and are still passionate about it, happy, I think they found that balance. That's a really good thing to share. What do you think, if you think, Matt, over the last 10 years, and you think about our industry, what do you think has been the biggest misstep or miss the industry's had? Like something we didn't see coming and we just ignored it, or we saw coming and just didn't worry about it?
That's a hard one, because it's an emerging industry, not unlike a developing neighborhood or a professional who's finding his or her skills or passions, in that mistakes are kind of part of the process, and we're good at trial and error. We're good at learning from our mistakes. My father gave me a sign above my desk, and it says, "Always make new mistakes," which suggests that you should try to avoid making the same ones over and over again. So it's hard to say that there's a big mistake or a misstep, but something that I have noticed that seems to get overlooked, and I think doesn't get nearly the amount of attention that it deserves in this era of our industry, which has so much money coming in, so many headlines, so many big companies coming in, just doing all kinds of things. I think a storyline that oftentimes gets lost, and that in the end is actually the most remarkable, is the story of these professional owners and managers. who are operating little incredible hospitality businesses. And that is not easy, and it does not happen overnight, but they've built little empires tiny empires, if you will, for themselves, these architects. And I think that oftentimes gets overlooked, and I think as on the provider side of our industry, you can never tell those stories enough and really champion these owners and managers who are doing really incredible things. There's lots of flashing lights and other things that are going on, but I think it would be a huge mistake to forget the substance and the core of the industry, which is the owners and the managers who control the inventory and who are building this movement from the ground up.
And so remembering the human element, that at the end of the day, this business is here to connect people and bring delight, and that's what all these other things sort of come together to help serve.
And at the end of the day, the small owner or manager with 5 or 50 or 100 properties can probably do that better than any size corporation in the world.
Okay. So that's looking retrospectively. If you look today where we're in the market, there seems to be a lot of discussion around regulation of vacation rentals, whether it's regulation because of housing stock and theories that it artificially manipulates the price of those homes, or noise complaints and neighborhoods. Personally, for me, as I've met vacation rental managers, I've never met one who sort of says, you know what, I'm here to trash the owner's house and throw as many ragers in this neighborhood as I can, and I don't care about my neighbors. Right? I think actually vacation rental managers truly do think about how to be good stewards in their community. What I've observed as I'm seeing this change in regulation is it's just their business has been growing quickly, right? They're bringing in new guests and guests who have different personality types and are doing different things. And how do they stay in front of it as they're still trying to clean the house and purchase linens and repair the HVAC system and all the other things that go into that? One theme I'm a big fan of is that some of this tech we're seeing should help augment those operations so they can save time there and allow them to still spend time on their stakeholders, which is some financial, but some the guests, some the owners, and then their community. What's your thought as you observe some of this discussion around regulations and being better stewards? Is this something you think that as an industry, we're doing the right things and truth will sort of come out once the dust settles? Or do you think there's some things that as an industry we need to maybe do a little bit better or reconsider how we're doing them in order to show that we're good stewards in the community? With or without the tech tools, are we doing the right things, or do you think there's something missing from an advocacy
standpoint,
from a tech, from whatever it is? Like, do you think, like, generally, think of it like a dust storm. Do you think the dust storm just started, but the reality is we're pointing in the right direction, we're doing the right things, and the dust will settle and people will see the truth? Or are we misdirected, and when that dust starts to settle, we're going to end up, we're not on our right path, and we need to somehow course correct? Whether that's advocacy, tech tools, just emails, whatever it is, just how do you course correct there?
I think there's two lines of thinking. One has to do with us as independent owners and managers taking full responsibility for our business and our neighborhoods. All the instances that you read about, the horror stories, those are cases of owners and managers not doing that, being bad neighbors. From a regulatory standpoint, every professional owner or manager that I know wants fair regulation. And that sometimes surprises people who think that vacation rental industry is just about pirating an economy, a local economy. So I think the first real step is for neighbors to come together with one another. Vacation rental professionals are part of those neighborhoods. For the vacation rental professionals to raise their hand proactively and say, we are part of this neighborhood, we want to be good neighbors. We want to have good guests. We don't want to make your lives miserable, but we also have the right to rent our property. So I think that a lot of that entails simple organization on a group level. Neighborhoods, cities, and in some cases the countries need to sit down and come up with a singular voice, what we believe in, what we think our role is in this community. And they need to be able to articulate it to other neighbors and to lawmakers. This is something that you see in all the successful advocacy instances. That's exactly what these leaders have done, is they've mobilized the independent owners and managers to come together to create a singular voice and to speak clearly about being responsible. And the opposite is also true. On the tech side of things, this is the second line of thinking. It is so important as any business owner nowadays to be open to different tech solutions that will make your life and your business better. If you're not doing that, you are severely putting yourself at a disadvantage. There's so many pieces of tech that we've seen in our space only over the last 5 years that I think are unanimously good things for both independent business and the industry as a whole. Point Central smart locks. I mean, the ability to be able to control a lock from a central point wherever you happen to be, I think is just a no-brainer. I think pieces of technology like smart locks, pieces of technology like the ability to accept bookings online on your own outside of a listing site, to accept credit cards, is a huge part of the independence of taking responsibility for our businesses as opposed to putting that off on someone else. But I also think that there are instances in which we cannot succumb to tech and just think it's going to solve our problems or make everything better, that we actually have to revert back to the old-fashioned thing that is now a new luxury. Mm-hmm. And that's showing up, sitting down for coffee with local stakeholders, meeting guests, writing handwritten apologies to neighbors who get pissed off about parties, just taking human responsibility and being present, I think is the balance there. You want to use the best tech tools that will improve the business, but not sacrifice those human elements that make you, you.
Yeah. I was on a panel before this where we were talking about how tech is not a cure-all, right? But tech can, again, help augment things. And as people start to use tech, it can start to provide the data that allows you to show or to behave as a better steward. So, we talked about noise, right? So now you can get some noise data that allows you to call a guest and maybe just give them a gentle nudge. But then there's another step to it, is you start to get that data, and maybe you have someone in the community who just doesn't like that you're renting your home out, and they complain. Now you have the data to actually go to them and be like, look, I'm actually not causing a problem. I'm doing all these things. I'm following these procedures. So I agree with the way you started the statement is regulation isn't necessarily a bad thing so long as it's sort of thought through and fair. It actually sort of sets a ground level for everyone who wants to be in the space, which then everyone can innovate from that point forward from a standard starting point.
And to do so proactively.
Yes.
Chances are, if people are working on the advocacy, they're getting crushed by a law that's trying to get passed. The big tip here is, if you're not necessarily in a dire situation yet, step forth and begin taking measures now before it's too late.
Now's the time to start having coffee with your local officials and neighbors. Good point there. Okay, so also before this, Matt, you had your roundtable event here at Verma. And when I've been fortunate to attend a couple of those in the past, there's always a diverse range of conversations. But one conversation that seems to always come up as owners talk about growing their business is, how do I market my business? What's the right way for me to tell my story? And I think I actually saw you give a presentation once about the intricacies of telling your personal story. What are some best practices or thoughts you'd like to share with the listeners around that of, figuring out your own story, and then the best way to bring that story forward to guests and owners?
First of all, it's being authentic. It's not trying to copy some big hospitality company that you admire. You can take hints from that. But being authentic, sitting down and basically writing out who you are, what makes you different, what are your tastes, what makes you happy in life, how you fell into this vacation rental business, who the people are that you work with. A lot of times owners and managers think that that's not professional to share this kind of personal insight, but in fact the opposite is true. Guests are looking for that level of intimacy when they're considering a property to stay at. Putting that all out there, I think, is hugely helpful. You get over the fact that you're sort of disconnected from this brand. Beginning to, what I say is, help, don't sell. sharing as much information about your area as possible. If you moved to the area 10 years ago and have built up a great relationship with a local restaurant, that is a huge value add to your potential guests. That's something you already have within you. That is something that a gigantic corporation simply can't do because of scale. And that's a great advantage. So I think channeling all of the things that make you special and that make you within your vacation rental business in that community special is the first step. You got to get all that out. Then how do you share that with people? A lot of different ways. I'm a huge advocate of having a blog in which you're publishing updates on a regular basis. I'm a huge advocate of having a complete About Us section on your listing sites that gets into details of like, what was the crazy story that got you into this business in the first place? Weaving it into your marketing is a very easy thing to do immediately, but also continuing that storyline. I like to call it the underdog storyline. This person who has somehow achieved this business and throughout various challenges and obstacles, embracing the underdog, sharing some of those vulnerabilities, that actually endears travelers to stay with you.
And I mean, I'm assuming the underdog may go away as a business stays in business and grows. But what you're talking about of telling your story, right? If we step back and went to Marketing 101, every entity has a sort of brand value and brand mission statement. And it's no different for individual vacation rental managers. Telling your story about who you are and why you do this is your brand's value and mission. And you need to lean in on that and tell that, because that is what will attract the guests you want to work with and the owners you want to work with, versus if it's plain vanilla, you're going to have everything and everybody come at you.
Yeah, I want to add that to my answer. Mission statement. Every independent owner and manager should sit down and create a mission statement that is extremely clear that defines what they do. Is that okay? Can I Can I steal that
I'm
from
just
you?
going to mark it's 1:04 p.m. here in New Orleans on October 15th, and I had a good idea that Matt Landau built off of. So I'm going to probably have a beer before my panel at 3 o'clock now. So let's take that concept, and you talked a little bit about the consolidation, and you've talked about how these tiny architects build their fiefdoms or their empires separate from the larger entities. We are seeing larger entities form through consolidation. We're seeing large entities start to look in this space and figure out how they partner or become part of this space. As some vacation rental managers sometimes, again, may panic or get nervous about that. What do you think is the key thing to remember with all this money and interest flying around the industry?
That is such a good question, and that a lot of people are freaking out right now because consolidation and really any kind of change of that scale is really scary. It's hard to accept a lot of times. So you can either spend your time freaking out about it and trying to control the uncontrollable and trying to stop the inevitable. The metaphor that we used in the previous seasons of the podcast is that there's a parade coming through town. You can either join in or you can sit on the sidelines, but you are not stopping it. Mm-hmm. So I think trying to stop it is a highly stressful and the least strategic way of doing it. The other way of doing it is looking at what you can control from within you. I always like to give a shout out to my yoga instructor. He says you have everything you need within you to change. And if we focus on the things that we do have within us, that goes for our marketing, that goes for the way that we treat every guest, that goes for our employees that we work with, that goes with really everything under the umbrella of our vacation rental businesses, so long as we are operating in a legal and regulated environment. When you start focusing on those things, the other stuff gets way less stressful. I've noticed managers who are really confident and organized don't really react when they hear these sorts of announcements or huge consolidation news. It's not to say that they don't adapt to it. I mean, there's instances in which your software might have gotten sold to someone else and you're not willing to deal with the new terms. But they adapt and they say, okay, it's time to move on, find a new property management software to work with. Adapting to that change is so cliche. It almost makes my brain just shut off hearing those words. But if you are moving forward constantly, you have a place in the future.
And the reality is a lot of these things, all markets have cycles. right? And you look around today, there is a lot of interest and resources flowing around, but there was 5 or 7 years ago, the exact opposite probably, right? So to your point, the people who are sort of taking a longer term vision, they're passionate about this, you have to be smart, don't waste your efforts doing things you can't change, but how do you work within the momentum of that moment to stay true to who you are and continue to push your story forward? That's what's important.
The neighborhood that I spent so much time in, Casco, after 10 years, it had developed so much that I felt like it was my time to leave. Mm-hmm. And there was other things about my life that contributed to that. But I felt that the neighborhood had changed dramatically from what I first was attracted to. And I left. And I came back like several months later, and I met these guys who had moved down from New York City. They were extremely successful bar and restaurateurs in New York. And they moved down and they purchased a piece of local like commercial real estate, and they opened this bar. And to see them talking about how exciting it was to be in this cutting edge neighborhood and how challenging it was going to be and how new it was and fresh reminded me that there are cycles, there are waves, and if you're not feeling it, you can opt out, but you can also kind of see in the eyes of these newcomers, be reminded about what a great destination it is, what a great industry that we work in.
Yeah, life's all about chapters and enjoying each chapter and then moving on to the next. Okay, so you just used the term cliche, so just to pick on that one, what are some of the other cliches you feel are circulating out there now that are, again, maybe causing first-time property managers or maybe vacation rental managers who are looking to take the next step in their business that are causing confusion or making them go down paths that you don't think are necessarily true to who they are?
This is a really good question. Did you come up with that question? It's really good.
Stuart's feeding them to me right now. Him and Tammy are giving me pieces of paper.
Okay, cliches. I have a thing with cliches. First of all, they become cliche because they're really good phrases, and people resonate with them. So let's get that out of the way. They're good. They're a good thing in general. But there are indeed some cliches that really bother me, and I try to avoid as much as humanly possible. One genre of the cliches is the traditional business talk that people use. So whenever I hear any of the following phrases, my brain turns off and I tune out. Value proposition, funnel, like moving people through the funnel. Even things like customer service. I've heard so much, and they're so cliche in the business world because they're true, but I don't like them for our industry because they're not really as accurate as they could be. That's one bucket. Another bucket are the specific names, such as Airbnb, has become cliche. It represents something that is more than specifically Airbnb. And I think that's dangerous. I think vacation rental professionals who operate truly independent vacation rental businesses, who very well may use Airbnb in generating bookings, need to begin describing their businesses as professional vacation rental businesses and not Airbnbs. You could argue that that's a nice way of explaining what it is to people, and I'm all for that, but we cannot make synonymous Airbnb with the broader vacation rental industry. Not okay. Third and final bucket of cliches are the business case studies that people try to compare us to. So I get up on stage and I hear, not when I get up on stage, when I see people get up on stage and give examples of how Walmart grew their business, and this is how you should build your property management business, I just think that's a cliche. It's an easy way of trying to explain something, but it's a disservice because it's not relevant enough to us. It's not close enough. When I look at the comparisons of small businesses that have built up, we must look closer towards hotels, for instance. Don't just reach for the easy Amazon example. Look at something a little bit closer to the industry when we're giving examples to avoid that esoteric, like, okay, here goes the canned message again, and to actually keep people engaged when you're explaining what you do. 3 categories of cliches that I think do our industry a disservice.
Okay, and I'm quickly trying to commit those to memory so I never use any of those cliches, at least in front of you.
You better not.
All right, so you mentioned...
Cliche!
You mentioned looking sort of towards hotels as a reference point. And if I take that comment and tie it back to something a few moments ago, we were talking about regulation. one of these subtopics that comes out of regulation is safety in our private accommodations, which hopefully you don't hate that as a cliche.
No, that's okay.
But if you just think of private accommodations compared to hotels, they'll say they're not as safe for guests to be in. I think, again, I've seen a wide variety of applications of that. What do you think? Do you think we're doing the right things as an industry? Or do you think there's some gaps there we do need to improve on? Whether it's, your comment of people who are not professional hosts acting more like professional hosts, or just things, again, as an industry we need to bring forward that allows people to know that these are just as safe as a hotel, and then have all these other different experiences behind it.
Safety is so important, and it doesn't get the attention that it deserves either. It's also one of those things that you tend to only think about after something unsafe has happened, when it's too late. It's something that an emerging industry is especially vulnerable to, and frankly, something that could sink us if enough safety issues take place without our prevention. So safety is hugely important, and it falls onto the shoulders of every single independent owner and manager to do. And the unfortunate fact, when we attend a conference like this, most people are super responsible and professional at these kinds of conferences because they are leading their industry or their local market. They want to be better. But the vast majority of vacation rental people out there, hosts, are not this considerate and thoughtful. They're doing it on the side. They maybe don't care about it quite as much. They're just not as serious about it. Those are the ones who ruin that's the bad apple that ruins the bunch. So not only doing what we should as independents, making sure our homes are super safe. Someone like Justin Ford, Dwell Safe, is probably the first one that's putting out templates and manuals and checklists, things that we need to have, because there is no worldwide organization that certifies the safety of a property. Some groups are doing it, and I hope to support them, and I hope they all work, because safety needs to be improved for sure. And if we do not improve safety, I fear that enough people on their first trial of vacation rentals as a traveler will get turned off, and the mass potential of this industry will be lost. So I think we must nip this all in the bud as independent people, proactively doing things within our own control to make for safe environments. And a lot of times that includes getting the guy who's not serious or not safe down the street to shapen up, or else.
Yeah.
Fight him.
Common theme I'm hearing from you is just this proactive nature, right? There's growing interest. There's some rumblings of challenges, but now is the time to, as an industry, be the voice in our local community, bring together all those who are vacation rental managers, whether they're professional or not, to make sure we are operating as the best stewards to the community and to guests and to owners as we can be. And that will help us get to that next evolution. Okay? Matt, so bringing all of our topics here to my second to last question for you here.
Penultimate.
Yes. What do you think the vacation rental manager of the future, and let's define the future of in 5 years from now, 5 to 10 years, what does that vacation rental manager look like, and what's distinctly different than maybe what a vacation rental manager looks like today?
The $1 million question. If I knew the exact answer, I would probably begin building a fleet of vacation rental cyborgs, and I would travel with them everywhere.
Well, they look like Battlestar Galactica with like the red line or dot going back and forth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With a big VR on their chest. The vacation rental manager of the future is doing the things that cannot be scaled. I refer to this theory as the theory of limited edition, the small batches, the things that are only done on your own terms. This is the protective force field that the property manager of the future builds to protect themselves from market shifts and industry corrections. You stop worrying about large acquisitions. You stop worrying about influxes in competition. You stop worrying about all of that if you are doing things that cannot be replicated, that are truly you, or perhaps more accurately, only replicated on your own terms. That covers a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways you can be doing it. Some of it costs money, some of it takes time, some of it requires energy, some of it is free. But the more deliberate we can be with our anti-scalable practices, the more of a protective moat we build around our businesses, and the more we guarantee ourselves a place in this future.
So automate, outsource, scale the things that can be compartmentalized and are not unique to us, and double down on the things that are unique to our independence, brand, mission, and vision again.
Precisely. Okay. Find out where you can, I'll just leave it at that.
Perfect. Okay, last question for you, Matt. We're going to take the last question, which was, where do you think the vacation rental manager of the future is? And we're going to make this much more personal for you.
Uh-oh.
So your show recently was picked up for some more international distribution. Parentheses, Matt's doing a little dance right here in front of us. Happy dance. I've heard congratulations. I've heard, there's rumblings of it maybe being shown at Cannes and picking up some other stuff. So that's awesome to hear. Where do you want your show to be in 5 years, and what role do you want that show to play within the industry as we evolve?
The show is the biggest challenge that I've ever encountered, for sure. It's been also the most fulfilling. The Vacation Rental Show is the first travel show to showcase the magic of vacation rentals. And the mission has always been to introduce newcomers to vacation rentals with realistic expectations by showing what our industry is capable of. And that mission has been great. I mean, we're encountering travelers who have never stayed in vacation rentals before, are realizing how interesting it may be, instead of a hotel for their next trip, to consider a vacation rental. We're actually changing behavior, and if it works, if people have a good time in that experience, they attribute all of this back to our wonderful industry. And so I think ideally, I'm not sure what kind of platforms the show is on. I'm not sure exactly what kinds of television sets or screens people will be watching it on. Heck, in 5 years at this rate, they may be watching it like inside of their ear or something. I don't know. I think most important to us is continuing to represent the values and the strengths of the independent owners and managers. And I think we're going to continue doing that to a greater and greater audience. I think we're going to continue refining our understanding and our ability to story tell, which is really all we're doing. And ultimately, I think that this vacation rental movement opens people's eyes up to more than just a place to stay, a different kind of place to stay, but a kind of transformative experience, a new way to travel, a new way to be, really. And if we can impact people to the extent that they make a small decision, different kind of restaurant that they may go to on their next vacation, a different kind of destination, a stranger that they may reach out to and chat with, if we can effectuate that change, I think that is an absolute dreamy position to be in 5 years from now. And of course, so long as I'm doing it with the same team and featuring people that I admire so much.
Well, that's awesome, and I'm sure it'll be a fun ride as we all get there. So, Matt, on behalf of all your listeners, we'll say thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Thank you for interviewing me, Mr. Mueller. I was terrified at the beginning of this. Now I know how the people who I interview feel sitting behind the crosshairs. But it was very nice. Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to remind everyone that this episode was brought to you by Point Central, the home automation experts of our industry. You can head over to pointcentral.com/VRMB, fill out the form, and take a free demo. You'll also get free HVAC analytics, and I can promise you that Sean's team will take great care.